Hi, I'm IKEA, and for today's video, we're going to have an in-depth look into those shotguns as as the next one in the list. The big list of them has been done for a little bit, and actually at this point, also pistols and Mars is completely done, so they are at the ready. They all live, of course, in this big folder of DPS tables, which I'll, of course, link down below, together with a direct link as well to the shotgun one that we're going to go in depth into today. As always with these, it's going to be based on this big table. We're going to go over several parts, and all of it will be timestamped. First, we'll start with the premise. We'll go into the build that we'll be using for this one, which is a Hunter's Fury. Then we'll go into the looking through the DPS side of things, then also briefly through the sustain side, and we'll be going both comparing shotguns in between themselves and then also with different talents on them. So to kind of see, especially for instance on a build like this, where it has a lot less crit damage than for instance a Striker would with AR. We can kind of see some differences pop up between some of the talents as well. And yeah, everything will be timestamped down below, so you can jump around as you wish. And then we'll also end off after the sustain part with going to my stash and kind of going weapon by weapon, and I will kind of explain my final thoughts on basically all of them. And if you're kind of just interested in the summary, that might be the spot to jump to. So yeah, let's go get started with our premise. And to set our scope and intention kind of here, we'll be comparing it on a Hunter's Fury build. We'll see the build in a second. It does not have a Coyote, and we're not going to expect a Coyote. We're kind of acting as if we're solo here. So yeah, we're leaving out the Coyote. We're going to go as well with Grade 27. This, of course, does affect some of the talents like Optimist or Pummel, which are weapon damage based. We have to pick a number here. I went with the highest grading. Of note as well then here is to point out that if you want to try it out with other stats, basically, you could copy this to your own Google Drive. It is openly available from that link. And yeah, you could actually change the numbers here at the top to reflect other, going with other things. Like for instance here as well, we've gone with 10% headshot and 60% DTA. Of course, shotguns have DTA as their secondary main stat, so it does affect here, although of course all of them have basically the same, are getting affected in the same way because we have DTOC as a third stat. Alongside of it, none of this is with either contractors or such as well. So they all basically have the same number there, but yeah, we're just setting that as 60% just to, as well, for these numbers that we get out of it. But yeah, we are picking 10% headshot. With the other ones, I went with 20%. I feel with shotguns, yeah, it's generally you go for the body shots. You might get a land the pellet here or there, unless you're basically going for headhunting versions, of course. But here we're actually as well specifically discussing a crit chance, crit damage based version. We're talking about DPS. I'll briefly actually go over a list for headhunters. We'll do that after the sustain part. Here as well, all of the weapon mods, so the crit chance, crit damage spots, we're actually going with crit damage, and that is because if we go to crit damage mods with the setup that we have, we can land on a very beautiful 60, which actually looks really nice. And then as well makes it easier here for comparison's sake, because with the weapons that have no mods, we're just going to lose those two crit damage mods, and we don't really have to play around with the crit chance much. And then if the weapon has a magazine slot, which some of the shotguns do, in basically all of those, the only real option is to go with, at least in this case, you could of course put handling characteristics in there, but we're going to go with the reload. Altering the reload slightly, which will affect the sustain here. And then, yeah, as talked about, we're doing grade 27, 10% headshot, and then 60% DTA. But then as well here, we have Hunter's Fury, where we are putting it at the 5 kill mark, basically. This, of course, is a separate multiplier. Same for Intimidate that we have on this build is a separate multiplier. It doesn't really affect the percentages in between weapons, but it does. We can kind of more correctly compare what crit or well, with the DPS numbers that we get, more so for inter-weapon type, looking around like that. And then, yeah, we're going to start off with sustain, or with burst, and then go to sustain as the second list. But of course, lists here what it's sorted by. And yeah, this is, of course, just only really the burst and sustain DPS that we're discussing here. We're leaving out, yeah, a lot of context, of course, around it with handling and such. Well, I will address kind of as we go through weapons that handle horribly, but within shotguns, they're pretty similar with a few exceptions. So yeah, we'll have to, that's the scope that we're keeping it to. We're not kind of holistically, although of course towards the end I will kind of bring in game knowledge as well, and we're gonna review them basically towards the end. But yeah, don't bring up kind of like, oh, this is just DPS, this isn't how it works in the game. Somewhat yes, somewhat no. The thing is, of course, that we need this. This is like the horsepower or a torque of a car. It is a very important stat. It isn't the only thing that matters. And we have to keep that in mind. Also, of course, we're using some things that are, for instance, like killer, which need a condition to be met to be active. For instance, killer getting a kill with the last pellet of the shotgun being a crit, which is actually very important. It isn't just getting a crit within the 8 pellets that each shotgun has. You have to specifically, the last shot of it has to be a crit, or the last pellet hitting. That means that it doesn't have perfect uptime in comparison to some things like, for instance, flatline, where we can kind of consider perfect uptime. We're not addressing uptime here at all because it's going to be very different. So for instance, Sadist usually will top these charts at 30%. Is that realistic? Not really, but somewhat yes if you have an OD in the team and everything's bleeding. So yeah, we're kind of, I'm going to discuss here how active I perceive some of the talents to be, but of course, yeah, you kind of have to apply your own situation to it because it's also going to be very different per situation for some of those talents. Yeah, having laid down all those caveats, let's go actually look at the build and then go further from there. And as stated, Hunter's Fury is the build that we are going to use for this, with Intimidate, Adrenaline Rush, Cheska Chest, Grupo Backpack, but of course the positioning of those doesn't matter much, just Cheska and Grupo as we're using it here. This actually does have, is one of the builds that is on the build collection, which is 4.012. But actually, if we go look at the build picture, we see that we actually are here using the crit chance mods actually on the weapon. We're landing on 58,130. In the calculation list here, we're actually going a different route, which for the high-end weapons actually works out better. So we have 2 crit damage mods here. Then together with that, we're flipping basically 2 crit chances here from, or 2 crit damages from the mods, as it was on the chest and backpack on that, from crit damage to crit chance, although of course this could be any of the other crit damages. And that actually works out a little bit better because we land on 60, 126, which overall actually does make a difference there, especially as well. We're now hitting then 60, which would help better with some of the talents like killer, and of course not at too much of a loss. The only downside is that going that route, for instance, weapons that have fixed 10% crit chance, like the Scorpio, we need to, yeah, that they are now over crit basically, right? Because the build itself has 60 on it. So for those, yeah, we would need to go with the other one. So for instance, as well with this, I wouldn't per se actually even entertain the use of the Scorpio there. I would likely go more with a combo like this. Because yeah, we're very much more set up for that way. But yeah, that is an important change that, yeah, we can nowadays swap crit chances and crit damages. And actually for every crit damage that you put on a weapon, you can actually shift crit chance by 1 on the gear. So here we're doing it by 2 to go from 58 to 60, which yeah does make a little bit of a difference because that balance does matter a little bit, especially as well, seeing as we could have outside sources giving us more crit damage as well. And setup-wise, it's just all that. We're gonna act as if Intimidate is always up because we can kind of keep that up. We're gonna act as if we're on the 5th kill of Hunter's Fury. Just doesn't per se matter much because it is a separate multiplier. So yeah, let's go and get started with Burst DPS. And with all that out of the way, let's start actually looking at this big list. It is not as big as some of the other weapon types, as there's actually not that many shotguns nor that many exotics for them. And also, yeah, we're actually a much shorter list of talents are here, of course. First thing we'll kind of start off with is that, yeah, we're going to use the 100% mark again to be not at the very top for comparison, but we're going to use here, starting at the SASG 12 there with Sadist, the first kind of non-double barrel shotgun in this list. And that's for a very specific reason. When it comes to burst, technically, these double barrel shotguns and the sawed-off, they can burst. They can burst their hearts out. And yeah, this is actually the poster child for not just looking at only the burst number. And why you kind of need a sustain there to actually kind of better understand the weapon. Now, of course, if you were to just use it and kind of have this in mind, and then you fire 2 shots and go like, oh, wait, I have to reload after every 2 shots for 3 seconds. That's not going to work out. Yes, exactly. But we see that as well in the sustain number. Their sustains are horrendous, especially we'll see in a second, because it's not even comparing, because they're comparing as well to that SASG as the 100% mark, not even comparing to some of the better sustainers in this category. And they are pretty horrendous, except for instance here where we have them triggering pummel. But of course they can't trigger pummel. You have 2 shots to get 3 kills. Technically possible, although of course much more often what will happen is you can actually reload and then pummel will stay until it actually activates. So at some point you'll get a reload out of them, but not very a real reasonable thing to look at. First we're going to kind of discuss in between shotguns themselves, then we'll kind of go into talents specifically. But we can already kind of see the order of talents just appearing somewhat with, if we just kind of look at the double barrel shotgun, where, yeah, Sadist, Brazen, Killer, but then also we have Brazen actually at 8 stacks and 6 stacks, as we'll see later. We have Killer, we have Pummel, and then the D is just the damage component of it. R plus D is the reload component of it as well. So we are basically acting as if it's steady-handed as we kind of infinitely reload, just setting the reload to 0, basically. Not the best way to actually get the truth of it, but yeah, just as a way to kind of just quantify that, because there's no real, we would there as well have to make a value judgment. Here I'm just putting the reload on 0. I'm saying it's getting triggered at some point, or well, always effectively, which is of course not the way it's going to end up. Close and personal, optimist, ranger, and then fast hands at the end. So yeah, we kind of have the double barrel and the solid off. We have them, of course, way high up here, and that's also the reason we kind of put the 100% mark a little bit below it, just to not squish everything else, so we can kind of have a little bit of separation between the percentage, so we can much more easily see what is actually going on. But yeah, on the double barrel shotgun, yeah, if you're just putting out 2 shots, and that's all you need, sure. But yeah, anything that, the way that we are going to use shotguns here, for instance, is in Hunter's Fury sense, without Headhunter, but more just in a crit chance, crit damage sense, these do not make that much sense at all. But then moving on to actually, yeah, where we put our 100% mark as well, scroll down a little bit. We'll see actually the 2 big names that kind of moved up, and that is the SASG 12 and the Super 90. All of them, or both of them, have variants as well. With the SASG, the tactical is overall the better one, with a tiny bit better stability. With the Super 90 is also the tactical, actually, that is the top one. Both of those here with Sadist at the top. What we also kind of see is that Brazen is actually kind of right next door to it. We'll kind of discuss that when we get to the talents. But shotgun-wise, basically, the SASG and the Super 90, they're now overall basically the DPS kings. Especially as well, the SASG has a quite short reload comparatively to most things here, because it has also a magazine reload. And that's actually the big difference between the two. One is a magazine reload, the other is a per shell reload. Sometimes one is nicer than the other. So for instance, yeah, sometimes you just, yeah, if you're empty, this reload from empty of the SSG will actually be better. But then with the Super 90, if you're down just 2 shots, with the SSG, you would have to reload the entire mag. With the Super 90, you can just flip into shells. So playstyle wise and such will make a difference between those two. They're also pretty close to each other with 7 and 8 on the shells, and actually, yeah, very close to each other on the RPM here as well. And yeah, DPS wise, they are neck and neck basically. There's a 1% difference there. There is sustain wise a 2% or well almost 1.2% difference there. They're basically the same gun, just with a different reload mechanic. But that can matter to you because, yeah, for instance, if you're just running around and getting 2-shot, 3-shot kills, you might go with the Super 90 because then you can just plop in a few of those shells instead of doing the full reload of the SASG. And yeah, we'll see that list kind of repeating. We see here as well, yeah, the Brazen 8 stacks, then them with the killers, then them with the Brazens, then with the pummels, then with other things, and then we kind of see the next sadist show up on burst, which is the ACS. And of course, the ACS is very much, it has a role anyway, even if it didn't do good damage or anything, we would still use it for its role for stacking, as we do for strikers and for heartbreakers. And that is, of course, because, yeah, all of these shotguns fire 8 pellets. Also, to push that out there, because I sometimes see people going, oh, this fires 6, this fires 7. No, all of them fire 8 pellets. There is no shotgun in Division 2 that fires less than 8 pellets, except that they use the mechanic in the Ravenous, where technically is a shotgun firing 2 pellets, just as trivia. But yeah, all of them fire 8 pellets. So out of the magazine here of 20 shells, we can have 20 times 8. So we get 160 stacks out of it in a perfect situation. Now, of course, we're not going to land all those pellets, but that's, of course, what the ACS is kind of for. But we can also see that the DPS difference between this going to the SASG is pretty major. Here, of course, with the same talent, yeah, they don't compare well. These two, the SASG, the Super 90, especially in like the role that we're kind of using them here, very much in their own world, and then kind of some of the others show up. Now, of course, the SASG or an ACS could very well be used as well, because you do have kind of, yeah, that just unloading power, especially as well if we're kind of pairing it with something that likes to stack. Here, though, we're using it on Hunter's Fury. It doesn't care about stacking or such. It does not have a stacking mechanic except for the on-kill one, which, yeah, you're better off just getting those kills in. Here as well, let's actually discuss the Tsunami and the Light Blue, because of course they're based on those. Both are very good talents for shotguns. And then as well, the names are of course based on some of the better types of weapons. Those two both will matter a lot here, because especially the Tsunami is one of my common recommendations now. If we try to go find even more, actually, let's go with Control F Sadis or Sadist. We can highlight all of the sadist ones. The 612 then shows up. The 612 used to be the old DPS king, basically. It had really good burst. It had really good sustain, especially as well. It had a really quick reload. It doesn't have that anymore. To me, it is definitely surpassed now by the other two. It still has a decently quick reload. That is one of the benefits that it does have for a magazine reload as well. But its burst is especially so much lower that its sustain doesn't per se make up for it, because it does sustain better than the SASG, but not by enough, as we kind of see in maybe some other situations where we have a really much higher sustain that we can kind of go for it. Overall, yeah, the 612 is kind of, it used to be my go-to for just, yeah, the running gun builds, basically, if I was just using it for that way. Nowadays, that has been displaced for me with the SASG and with the Super 90. Then we have the M870. The M870 still has a very important role as the headhunter, one of the best headhunters in this category, together with the SPAS 12. We'll look at headhunters actually after the sustain part. It'll be its own timestamp part. But yeah, the 870 is very much for that. The reload of it has been much improved, which is kind of weird because they actually give it a kind of a leg up kind of that way. They kind of made it actually easier to use as well. In a DPS sense, we could kind of go with it. It is actually next to that 612. And then actually sustain wise, it actually out-sustains it. So honestly, for me, the 612, I would actually consider more the M870 using this, giving up a little burst, getting a little bit of sustain, but then also getting that like alpha damage, because that's also something that if you can poke out and just fire one shot and that one shot kills an enemy outright, that can actually have a lot of value, because then you're exposing yourself shorter, which is in a lot of games used as the under the moniker alpha damage, where yeah, the per hit damage is very important. But of course, yeah, the M870s definitely has a place for the headhunters, as we'll see later. And then yeah, we kind of go through, and we have the KSG here with Sadist, the SPAS 12 here with Sadist. Both of them kind of being close to the end of the list. Basically, we see actually that some weapons here with fast hands, they actually outdo the on burst DPS, the KSG with Sadist. And actually these don't, for instance, for the KSG, I don't feel, outside of its larger magazine size, which can be used, especially if you're using hard-hitting build, to guarantee pummel to happen. But I feel getting a 3-kill pummel, normal pummel, in this 12 shot is kind of just as hard as getting a 2-kill perfect pummel in, for instance, a Tsunami, because we need 1 kill less there. So overall, I feel the KSG is one of the bigger losers here, and really doesn't have a spot. I feel it is very much the stoner of this category, basically, where the stoner LMG is kind of outclassed in many ways by many of its compatriots. The KSG kind of, for me, lands in the same way. The SPAS 12 technically does have the highest base, which does actually mean that it can be used for headhunting, especially for a little bit higher cap, if that is what you're going for. To me, though, as we'll talk about in the headhunter part as well, the M870, just because it has mod slots, does much better than this. With these, that's being the last Sadist, we've kind of seen the order of things. We see basically the double barrels being very high up there, the SASG 12, and the Super 90 being kind of neck and neck and kind of landing next to each other. Then the ACS 12 doing decent burst, but a little bit worse on sustain. As we'll see, versus some of the things around it, if you were to main it, for instance, because yeah, we could go with the M870, which kind of has around the same burst, but a much better sustain, actually. The 612 was one of the hardest hits, but also the 612 was kind of it was definitely a little bit too high above the rest. So they may have gone a little bit too far with it, but it's still actually usable. Definitely, I feel up to this point, this 870 is definitely all usables. At least for the purpose that we're kind of using them here for as well. But then, yeah, the KSG and the SPAS 12, I generally wouldn't, especially the KSG, I wouldn't generally consider it unless you really have a purpose for this 12 rounds. But yeah, that's kind of a hard sell, especially when we have the Tsunami with perfect pummel, of course. And then, yeah, the SPAS 12, while it can be used for headhunting, I just wouldn't pick this in this with its atrocious reload and such as well for DPS role as we have it here when we have the 870. Yeah, let's continue on with the talents. And to do that, we'll highlight all of the SASG 12s as we have them here in the list. We'll kind of see the order of talents as they apply to that weapon specifically. And just to compare in between the talents, basically. As we always see, Sadist being just the 30% amp kind of shows up the highest here. But yeah, as we were kind of discussing, we have to very much consider how much uptime generally you're going to have on something. This build isn't set up to trigger sadist really if you're just getting the sadist activation through the talent, 1 every 3 kills basically. This is completely useless. If you're in with an OD, now it's suddenly a little bit more viable. Although as well, with Hunter's Fury, with it being a close range build, especially here with the shotguns, and shotguns also somewhat lacking a chest talent, I found Ridgeway actually a really good way to generally here and there mess around with to try to get close range, a good talent there, because Sadist is so high above some of the other choices that we have here that it basically is enough for a weapon talent and the chest talent kind of combined. There are plenty of situations where some of the lesser chest talents with some of the lesser weapon talents would be less than Sadist, would be by itself. So yeah, Ridgeway definitely actually a way to kind of go with this, but then you're kind of also limiting yourself when you're, for instance, the second you run into a Warhound that doesn't bleed, or an objective that you're trying to destroy that doesn't bleed, yeah, now you've lost all that damage, which is kind of course, kind of the trade-off there. But yeah, we need to always remember how active it is, especially when we kind of go to Brazen here. Brazen here with 8 stacks. We have an 8 stack version and a 6 stack version. We're taking those. I wanted to just have both in there, kind of. 6 is the minimum we can have on normal anyway, because at least 6 pellets have to hit for the next for the next shot to have Brazen activated on it. If we were to land all of them, although as well after a kill, this also resets to 8. It gives you basically a stack of 8 if you get a kill with Brazen. And Brazen is actually a pretty good talent to pick. It isn't so great for instance, Headhunter or something where you swap to it and then try to get a shot in. But actually for just general use, as long as you're generally trying to get the accuracy in, and that is the biggest factor of this. Yeah, you need to hit 6 pellets, at least for the non-perfect versions. And because of that, yeah, it's kind of limited in its usage, because quite often, if you're just generally running around, and even being in close range, you will find that actually it's kind of hard to always land 6 or more. We see, though, that even with 6, it is actually pretty high up here. We see as well Killer, and actually of note is that how Killer works on shotguns, because I've seen it being said wrong as well, is that, yeah, you don't need just a crit in between all of those shots, as I've seen some people say, and by that kind of recommend fully to go Killer. No, the way that it kind of works is that the very last pellet that kind of made the kill had to have been a crit. So it is basically the same chances for crit as any other weapon would be, basically. And you notice this as well if you just test it out for 2 seconds. But of course, those people saying those things haven't. We might go into for no particular reason on some of those. And yeah, we see that when Killer is active, although as well, here again, very important to note that, yeah, Killer isn't always active. You need at least a kill for it to activate, right? So at least a kill isn't bonus by it, but Killer is actually a very good pick for solo play, as it generally has been through all of these. I've recommended Killer a lot. As well, actually, we'll likely go into a video explaining kind of, because one of the things is that Killer as well kind of activates more than 60%. And there is a very good reason behind that. I'll likely just leave that for a rambling talk when we go into that. And yeah, it's not just the crit chance, it is actually higher than the crit chance that you activated. Then we see pummels here with damage. So the D is just the damage component where we just add in the weapon damage of it. And then R plus D actually as well sets the reload to 0, basically, meaning that, yeah, we're kind of just continuously getting the reload as well. Now that, of course, is also not per se realistic, but this would be the best way to quantify them here, kind of. We can see that pummel, once activated, it is actually a decent amount. It is definitely behind, because it is a jump here. We're going from, for instance, Brazen 6 stack from 93% to 88. There is actually a pretty hefty jump here. But it is still definitely usable, but what you use pummel for more, I feel, is especially this reload. Pummel is really great for just continuously keeping going without having to reload. And as well as we'll kind of come to the names in a second, the Tsunami being the perfect version is being on one of the top weapons in that way. is definitely one of the great picks. Then we see kind of Flatline being pretty far behind it here as well, with Close and Personal as well right next door to it. As well, we should say that this is on grade 27, which actually the things that are weapon damage based, like Pummel, like Close and Personal, like Optimist, all of those are kind of affected by that, of course. Here as well, actually, our killer is really high and kind of up there, because actually our crit damage is pretty low, of course, in comparison to some other builds, because shotguns just have 2 mods on them. So we, instead of the 3 we would have on even ARs, or the SMGs having their own crit chance, they're pumping it up quite high, especially on Hunter's Fury as the comparison point here. The crit damage being relatively low, although we're in the 120s. Yeah, it does affect it a little bit, that it's you gain more from killer just because the diminishing returns effect. Then yeah, we have Flatline, Close and Personal. Flatline, of course, we do here act as if we're losing a crit chance, basically. So we are losing, a crit damage, actually, because we're just using crit damage mods. All of the shotguns do have underbarrels, not all, not the double barrels and such, but excluding the double barrels, all of the shotguns actually have a long rail underbarrel. So yeah, all of them are included in the Flatline list. Then we have the Close and Personal as well, again, kind of activating after kill. I would generally, although this is after 1 kill, of course, without conditionality, except for the kill needs to be in a short range. I would generally pick Pummel just by amount, but also by that reload, of course. That reload is quite powerful. The Close and Personal by itself actually could use a buff and could actually, maybe go up quite a bit, because that range limitation is definitely there as well. You will quite often find yourself actually getting a kill that is within Hunter's Fury, within Intimidate, and then isn't within Close and Personal. Then we see Optimist here, kind of in the worst case scenario for it, as we were talking about with grade 27. So yeah, it's not hard to see that it's pretty far down. We're not actually including Strange here just because it didn't make much sense for shotguns. Then we see actually Ranger at 12 meters here. I'm including it at 12 meters before just the optimal range drop-offs kind of happen with some of the shotguns, because otherwise it might be a little bit, but we're just using it as basically a 6% mark to kind of have as a comparison point. Then we see here as well, Fast Stands included here. Fast Stands, of course, not adding anything to the burst DPS side of things. It will add to the sustained DPS. Of note is that actually Fast Stands is, since a few seasons already, working per pellet. So you can actually get a reasonable amount of stacks, even with a small magazine size. With Pummel existing, though, I would generally go with those. Although, yeah, Fast Stands definitely can be a choice, for instance, for the ACS or such, as which can, of course, get all the way up to the max stacks. If we kind of then release this a little bit, let's go talk about some of the names that are in this list, because we kind of discussed the talents. One of the things that with those talents as well, it's kind of the same for each of those weapons as it goes through. So I would definitely consider Brazen. I would definitely consider Killer. I would definitely consider Pummel, and I use them quite a bit. Sadist were applicable. For instance, I do have an OD shotgun based build, basically. So that's where Sadist very much comes in. Here then, Light Glue and Tsunami being some of the better weapon or names based on some of the better weapons. We see them as well, kind of show up pretty high up here, and the talents are pretty good as well. As I talked about, Pummel is definitely a pick, Brazen is definitely a pick. Both of these, definitely a pick. The Light Glue taking the shot amount down to, or the pellet amount hit for per shot to 4, really makes it much more consistent. You will at least have like, you never completely lose it, which is kind of a nice thing, basically. The extra text that it has at the end is very misleading, where it says you get an extra 8% for the kill. I'm not sure how that remained there after PTS and how it's still not fixed. But yeah, that is completely not the case. You don't get an extra component after kill. What that actually is implying, although that's applying to all Brazen anyway, is after a kill, even if you hit with just 1 pellet, it will activate Brazen at full stacks. So you basically have an on-kill bonus that will make the next shot definitely have the full 8 stacks, even if you hit with 1 pellet, which wouldn't per se like trigger the talent at all, which is just a little bit awkward. Then yeah, so Tsunami being perfect Pummel, just needing 2 kills instead of the 3. very much worth it. This is one of the top picks in this category by itself, and yeah, very worthwhile. Here we're showing it kind of, yeah, as we'll see in the on the sustain side with it just being R plus D basically, the reload plus the damage. Then we see as well kind of here a lefty with just, I've basically put in lefty with just the 20% component to it, which is not, of course, how we kind of use it, but I kind of wanted to just have it in here. We also see the Enforcer. The Enforcer is, of course, perfect pummel, and then on a Super 90 instead of the SASG that the Tsunami is. But it comes at a big loss, and that is that it loses its third stat. Now, of course, this is a weapon that was a pre-order bonus. If you didn't have it then, there have been moments when it had erroneously has been given to people in some ways. But yeah, it's not generally available, definitely. But yeah, it loses that 10 detalk. Look how far this has dropped this Enforcer, because of course, if it was just a Super 90 with that 10 detalk, it would basically be next door to the Tsunami. But yeah, it drops down quite severely because of that 10 detalk missing. That makes it as well that, yeah, I would just generally pick the Tsunami over it, because if this had the detalk, actually, this would be the top weapon overall over the Tsunami, I would say, because you can also just between kills, just reload a few shells. You keep the amount of pummel. You will eventually just trigger pummel at some point, basically. And yeah, it's honestly, from a balance standpoint, better that we don't have a Lexington here as well. So yeah, maybe from a balance sense. Then we see actually the Scorpio show up. The Scorpio got hit hard, of course, on its damage end as well, together with its talent being a little bit worse now. Here we have it actually with the 20% amp of it active on the 9th shot. So this is 8 shots without this first, and then it's up here. We can kind of go see where the unbonus version is, and it's pretty far down, and unsurprisingly so. It is basically a shotgun that has just that 10% crit chance that all shotguns or the 612 would have of next door, but then of course without a damage talent per se. But of course, what the Scorpio can do, and isn't per se in the DPS sense, is that it can stagger enemies, it can basically stun lock rogues. It still is the only weapon that can do what it can, which is to just, put status effects on enemies and kind of keep them busy. And that has value as well. But yeah, definitely damage-wise, this used to be much, much higher. And honestly, I'm kind of okay with it being a little bit lower now. Going on to the Thorn, the Spas version, basically, of Perfect Brazen. Yeah, the Spas being so much worse kind of puts it in this spot down here. I wouldn't generally pick this as one of our named picks, especially when we have the light blue version, especially for the situation that we're using it here. So, for instance, maybe much more so for a Headhunter. And rock and roll just being an extra magazine size here, it is actually, of course, not any higher than just an ACS with for instance here fast hands, which is also a sustained talent. Rock and roll, of course, very useful situationally. One of the things of it is just to, as we talked about, with fast hands, actually the ACS having 20 shots times 8 pellets, you get a max of 160 stacks out of it. If we were to now go striker, which also stacks per pellet, yeah, you could get 160 stacks out of an ACS 12 and then have to deal with this reload, or you could have a rock and roll and then have 30 and then go to 240 stacks. So especially if you're going for the 200 stacks, I generally find myself using a rock and roll, especially if I'm using a chest striker quite often. Yeah, we see the Scorpio in without any bonuses to it, basically, when it doesn't have its 20% amp up, being pretty far low. It is definitely one to consider that now it is, for instance, this shotgun build that I was showing earlier, this used to be maining the Scorpio. The Scorpio is definitely a secondary to me here now. It is very useful for when we need to stun lock, but not for always use. We have also the Calibre. Of note is actually that the 870 already had a pretty good reload, and actually this Calibre would be one to consider as if, for instance, yeah, we didn't have Brazen or Killer or such, just for how quickly it does actually reload. It is a SMG-like reload, basically. It's like a tac vector kind of reload for an 870 that can hit hard. You can definitely use this just for basically hit and run tactics, where you just put out one really hard shot and then kind of just, go get your reload in. But yeah, especially on while it does keep up kind of on the sustain end, but still not even, it isn't still keeping up even with the SSG, with I just say this, we're losing, of course, a lot of burst on the burst end. We are getting some alpha from it though. Then as well, Sweet Dreams. Now the Sweet Dreams is of course very useful just for when we have those on the kill with melee challenges, as we quite often do with global events. It has a role, but I generally just wouldn't ever pick this over something like the Scorpio, for instance, as an exotic slot, or just as a main weapon. And last but likely least, actually, the Overlord. The Overlord is one of the truly bad exotics that we have kind of in the game. Here being in the shotguns, it really doesn't have, especially being based on the KSG, it really doesn't have any damage to it. It doesn't have burst. It doesn't really have sustain. Its talent of slowing things down. A Scorpio can shock enemies and 100% reduce their speed, at least on PvE end. At least for the PvE end, yeah, the Overlord just basically does not make sense at all. So yeah, that was the burst end of things. Let's go to sustain. And indeed onto the sustain end, where we're also again sorting not from the top, just because, yeah, we have those pummels coming in. They have very high numbers. If we were to go off of this top number, everything would be kind of squished beyond this point. So we're kind of excluding them and kind of again starting on some sadists. But we can see actually already, if we kind of do take pummel as if it's like always activated, basically we have never a reload. Yeah, that of course makes our burst our sustain. Basically, if there's no reload number there in the same way as the Bullet King or a steady-handed weapon, our burst is the same as our sustain. This will inflate those numbers quite a bit, of course. Of course, on a DB, on a double barrel, that makes 0 sense, getting 3 kills with 2 shots. Theoretically possible, you can actually get 2 kills. I don't know actually if it counts it for pummel. Actually, a thing that I don't know. We should maybe go test it. If you do get, because you can get multiple kills just by pellets hitting multiple enemies. I don't know if it counts it though, actually. But then, yeah, actually we do see that, for instance, the Tsunami here, very high up here. Now, of course, the Tsunami does not have a damage component. It just has an extra damage component to it versus just normal pummel. What it does have is 2 kills instead of 3. Much more consistent because of that. You can actually kind of reach those points. And this is kind of the reason as well. It is really high on burst. It is really high on sustain, if we kind of consider it this way. Can you get 2 kills in 7 shots? Yeah, definitely. So this is kind of doable. And if you do it that way, Tsunami is definitely one of the top picks in this category. The downside, though, is, of course, if you're not getting those kills, if you're fighting a hunter and you need like 15 shots to get them down, then you could go, for instance, with Brazen, which does activate from each shot, and then has that as an option, of course. So you kind of have to consider it like that. That's also why I'm generally pairing. I have multiple shotguns basically at the ready with different talents. But of course, nowadays as well, especially if you have a high-end shotgun there, you can move around the talent as kind of needed. We see as well the Enforcer being way below the Tsunami, even though it doesn't look it, to be that far off. Yeah, we're dropping, 10% there, kind of 15% there. Yeah. Enforcer were definitely usable. It's not the god weapon that I've seen some people it's not this category's Lexington, definitely. Same would be true for the Lexington if it didn't have the 10 detox at the end of it. And yeah, we kind of see then as well that especially the things that had higher reload, which are kind of balanced around their higher reload, are kind of higher in this list. When we kind of reach actually sadist here, we see actually 870 showing up as one of the best sustainers in this category. And that's why this one actually is somewhat usable for a DPS sense kind of idea. Of course, we're giving up quite a lot of burst for it. And yeah, of course, as well, magazine size and such. But actually, it bursts decently, although, of course, yeah, quite a bit lower than the SASG but it definitely sustains decently well just because it has a really decent reload. Now, actually, one of the faster reloads. It's kind of like the MG5 of this of the category now. We see then as well, just because of its reload being so much better, its Sadist, Brazen, and Killer kind of show up above the 612s than Sadist. But yeah, on the sustain end, of course, for instance, the 6 or the SASG does not. Well, we see one here with fast stands actually showing up. And yeah, actually, so what you might also see is that none of the fast stands really show up high up here. The changes to fast stands. So the ACS having basically the best chance of getting at the maximum out of fast stands. We still see that it is, it helps the reload quite a bit, but it isn't that effective at that. It isn't the end all be all for that. We could have definitely picked this, especially if you're using it for stacking and such, but I prefer, for instance, for myself to have a little bit more damage, or just to have the rock and roll, which just has 10 rounds more. And then talent-wise, here it becomes kind of interesting, because it kind of depends really on what weapon it is. The talents will shift around quite a bit, especially, for instance, yeah, things like fast hands, because it really depends how much pellets it has, or shots it has, and then, pellets from that. So we see them shift around quite a bit. We see actually that, yeah, the Scorpio and such does actually, well, here with the 20% amp, although, of course, if we try to go find the other end of it, it is not at the end of things, but it isn't too far off. It's not doing too great. This is also one of the reasons why, for instance, the Overlord is pretty bad. It's pretty much far down the list on both burst and sustain, and then it doesn't really have a talent to make up for it. The Sweet Dreams at least has that instant kill that can be very useful for instance, challenges with global events. But we see kind of around basically the talents in that same order, although Fast Hand's kind of moving around a little bit, and especially as well Pummel with its reload kind of moving around a little bit, depending on how much, how long the reloads were, because of course a weapon that has a long reload benefits more from that reload disappearing. But yeah, we kind of see the list here being 870, 612. Although, yeah, the 870 being both higher on burst and sustain, I would likely lean more towards that. The 612 still has a magazine reload, but then there's also a point where you just go, well, we could just step up to the SASG or the Super 90, which is kind of what, for me, is kind of the thing that, yeah, we just generally don't want to use the 612 anymore. Also, it's named, of course, is the mop, which is definitely usable. So for the mop, for that 10% armor and kill, with preservation, which definitely can be useful, for instance, having one of those for skill builds, because both of those, both the armor and kill, third stat, preservation, both of those can apply to skill kills as well. So quite often I have that as a secondary. I might swap to it when, for instance, on a mortar build, you get a bunch of kills, you hold that while you're getting the kills. You're not missing out, especially on explosion, on that being armor and kill, because the DTA is on the second stat. So you're still getting your DTA. The DTOC would not apply anyway, so you're just getting armor and kill from that, which is actually, yeah, definitely a useful piece to use that way, but then, yeah, not really for burst and sustain sense as we have it here. We see as well that, for instance, the KSG and the Spas, which were very low here with their top talent of Sadist, being very low on the sustain end or on the burst end, they don't fare much better here on the sustain end. Because, yeah, definitely the 870 can kind of outdo them. The 612, which are both higher than them on the burst end as well, they're higher on them than this on the sustain end. Those two definitely are, for me, ones that basically just do not make much sense. And then, yeah, we do see the SASGs kind of show up here with their Sadist. They are very much a little bit lower on the sustain end, of course, compared to that 870. But they burst so much better. So generally, for division, we kind of go much more with burst than we do with sustain. We don't have those super long fights that some games do have, you know, when you're fighting a boss for 15 minutes. In 15 minutes, we do a whole mission in division. So the thing of weapons will lean much more towards burst first, and then preferably they're not to have too horrible of a sustain or other things that break. And we kind of see that as well. If we're going to go to the end of the list here, because we kind of see the talents in the same order. If we go to the end of the list, it is exclusively the Sonoffs and the double barrels with the Sweet Dreams and Overlords kind of smooshed between them. But that's kind of the thing. The double barrels, well, on burst, they seem, of course, very high. They have a limiting factor in their sustain, and especially here also in their damage per mag. That is the balancing factor for them. And yeah, that kind of gets us through the sustain. And let's actually quickly have a look at what we would pick for Headhunter, because that is, of course, also a very important thing to kind of discuss with shotguns, as we do often use them in that way with Headhunter's Fury. And for those, we're just going to use their bases, basically. We were, of course, in this file, we're just going to go into the main burst and sustain file. Once in there, let's actually zoom it in a little bit. And actually, if you were to scroll down, we start with sustain and then burst and the mag damage. Nowadays as well, I have the base damage of all the weapons here just separated and then just sorted by. Especially for the weapon types that we use Headhunter with. So this is on pistols and shotguns and such as well. And then, yeah, we actually do see that the SPUS 12 with the -2 mod is actually a tiny bit higher on the base. So why do I keep talking about the M870 still? And that is very simply because the M870, the difference of these two -2 mods, the cap of the M870, because that is basically dependent on the current shot and then, of course, the headshot amounts that we have. The M870 having the ability, as we can, if we go into the game and go and mod an M870, we have the options here to put headshot mods on the and because of that, we can actually have in the barrel as well, +5 of a headshot. But yeah, we can have a 15 headshot there. We can have a 5 headshot here, a combined 20 headshot. That makes it that this actually, even on the cap shot, beats the SPUS 12. So it's a very simple, test that leads us to go with the M870 just as a whole. Of note as well, just to point that out, there is, of course, 3 variants of the M870. Overall, the custom has the biggest bar here, which is actually indicative of how much stability it does have. It does, if you A/B test them, pull up a tiny bit less than this one. But importantly, the military M870 actually does have the ability here, because the other ones, the custom and the wooden one, basically, they only have the ability to equip this mod. So this +10 headshot mod. That will still actually be equivalent to the SPUS 12. They basically land around the same number, basically. Kind of depends, of course, on how your headshot is also set up for the rest of it. But yeah, they land around the same number, just because, yeah, again, that SPUS does not have those mods available, because while the cap is based on that, you also have the current shot, of course, kind of going in there. The military has actually a different, it has this short optics rail, which does allow it to have this, basically what is the pistol headshot mod. We do lose some optimal range, although, of course, in this case, we'll be at point blank range anyway, mostly with it. But we can use that to have 15 headshots here and then another 5 here. So there is a little bit of difference between the 3 variants, and generally that is why you will often see military M870s being chosen for this. Although less important now, because these mods, of course, also got increased, because this used to be a 3 and a 5. It is still, of course, a difference between 10 and a 15, but actually this 10 is now also enough to, for instance, if you are using it with a Memento Headhunter's Fury, to actually reach that 150 headshot that you would need to get the better cap, basically. So yeah, overall, it's kind of a non-issue, but just I wanted to point it out here. Yeah, let's go on to my stash, and we're kind of go weapon by weapon and kind of explain what each of them does. And yeah, as always with the end of these, we'll kind of do a review of what we kind of discussed there, as I'll go weapon by weapon, as I have one of each weapon type basically in my stash. That is just there for the burst and the DPS tables, as we kind of saw, because sometimes there are differences between weapon types, and to kind of catch those, I have one of every variant of the weapons as well. And yeah, we can go weapon by weapon and kind of discuss my final thoughts on them. We'll start here with the exotics, and we'll start here with the Lullaby and the Sweet Dreams. They are both, of course, the same weapon, basically. And one is a pre-order bonus, which you can still also get through some bundle, basically. But it isn't worthwhile at all. It is just cosmetic. The Sweet Dreams is definitely useful for those moments where you need melee kills for something, for a challenge or such. Outside of that, I don't think we really use it at all. The Scorpio is much more of a useful tool, for instance, for medics and such, because you could definitely see this. Of course, this is also what we used to use before Scorpio came in on healing builds or builds that don't really do damage or such, but they could just run in, kill a purple, and get back out, for instance, on legendaries and such, which definitely has some value, but doesn't have enough value for what we use here, especially as well with it being a plus 12, its damage is pretty bad. Then we have the Overlord. This is overall, it should capitulate as its talent states. It is in effect on the PvE end of things, as we're kind of mostly discussing here, completely useless. and KSG with just a normal talent would be better, and that's actually not a good weapon to begin with as well. We do have the movement speed here, of course, but yeah, we have a Scorpio which can apply shock and just completely immobilize an enemy. The reduction isn't enough. It basically needs a talent rework, but then also being based on the KSG as it is, which is also not working well as a weapon. It's definitely, that could take some looking at too. We'll see if this in the future maybe gets some form of comeuppance, but for now, it is kind of dead in the water. Then we come to the Scorpio. It, of course, did get a pretty big hit. They did alter its bases, basically the base damage, especially as it's based on the 612. So the reductions to those kind of got carried over to the Scorpio. So on its main stats, it lost a lot. On its talent as well, it used to be 1 shot for the poison, 3 shots for the disorient, 6 still for the shock. So that part stayed the same. And then the 7th shot would apply the debuff for damage. These parts of poison, disorient, getting moved, that's not too big of a deal. It is still the only weapon that can do that, basically. So in a sense, for like eclipses and such, or just CCing an enemy, nothing can really beat it for that. But yeah, its damage drop-off definitely means that it's not the main weapon anymore. So for instance, on the build, we were kind of showcasing this all with the Scorpio was the main weapon with it. It was intended to be used with that. Especially this 9 shot as well, now being 9 shots instead of 7, means that you definitely need to reload, or you could go magazine size, for instance, for that as well. That would get you actually with a tactical reload, because the 612 can do that. You do get actually 9 shots in one magazine. But yeah, overall still very usable, but not the main weapon I would pick anymore. And let's go on to the high-ends. And for that, let's get started with the ACS-12 here, as we'll go from top to bottom. The ACS-12, of course, has its role. It is the auto-firing shotgun, the only one that we have, and because of that as well, we use it for its per pellet hit for strikers and heartbreakers. No other weapon can kind of do what it can do, so we use it for those. It isn't really great on a burst and DPS sense as well, that actually it does eat ammo quite a bit more than other shotguns. You will kind of run through your magazine, or well, especially your ammo reserves quite quickly with it, trying to main it. It is, as we saw from the burst and sustain, it isn't a good burster, it isn't a good sustainer. I would generally just pick an SASG 12 or a Super 90, or even, for instance, an M870, which is much more towards the sustain end, over using this as a main weapon. But as the tool to stack stacks with, that and, of course, its counterpart, the rock and roll, are very much, there is no better. If we go to the SASG 12s, we have also 3 variants of these. We have the black market SASG, as we have it there. We have the SASG with no other text around it. Then we have the tactical SASG 12K. Overall, the tactical SASG 12K is the best pick overall. It has a tiny bit more stability, and it is AB noticeable if you're shooting them side by side. You won't generally, if you have any of them, you can definitely use them. This, of course, as well with Tsunami, as we have it here as well, is very much the top picks, the one side of the top picks basically for shotguns, and kind of become my main go-to, especially the Tsunami. Although as well, the SSG with Killer or with Brazen really performs really well as well. They are magazine based. That is then they're kind of, it can either be a virtue or detriment. It kind of depends on your playstyles and such. It really depends on how quickly or how often that you reload as well. If you have some reload discipline, having the magazine is actually a faster reload once you reach the end of it. But of course, if you're just after a kill, after 2 shots, kind of reloading, with this, you're reloading the entire magazine, where with the SSG or with the Super 90, you would actually just do 2 shells and be a lot quicker. This is definitely the top pick overall for me, together with, of course, the Super 90. Then we have the M870s, as we saw. As we discussed in the Headhunter section, with the military M870, which the Calibre is as well, but of the military here, is actually has that short optics rail that for Headhunter can make a difference. In a crit chance setting, that doesn't, because all of them can take the 5 crit chance mod. What we have then is that actually the custom is overall the best stability-wise. They are very handleable. They hit pretty hard. They are very much, of course, based on their alpha. You could definitely put, for instance, pummel up here, and as well, you can reload here and there, because that does not remove the pummel. The pummel will eventually trigger on the 3rd kill, but you could, for instance, make a kill, reload it back up to full, and then continue on. You would need, of course, on this one, normal pummel, so you would need 3 kills. They are very usable, but the reload is now such that actually as well, you don't per se need it to have pummel or such. I've been much more moving them towards having Killer or having Brazen as really good tools. They do actually work pretty well, and they're much more towards the sustain side of things, more so than the burst side. And then the double barrels, as we kind of talked about, they're really high on the burst end, but that's kind of misleading, because yeah, they're very high on the burst end, but for 2 rounds at 200 RPM, yeah, those 2 rounds are out, and then you're kind of dropping towards sustain side of things. And their sustain sucks, just straight up. This is the poster child for, you don't just look at burst, you kind of need sustain as well, or just at the very least the game knowledge to know that 2 rounds at the bursts that we kind of list there is not manageable for any real purpose, unless you're actually killing in 2 shots. But if you're also killing in 2 shots like that, whatever you're killing was, you didn't need to per se min-max for it. Then we'll come to the KSG, as we have it here. The KSG is very much a weapon that I just wouldn't pick. It's kind of like the stoner in the LMG category. A lot of weapons do what it does, but better. If you have a purpose for this 12-round mag, which, for instance, Pummel in the past used to be, that could be a pick. Here, for instance, as well, I'm using it with fast stance to try to get more pellets hitting, basically, because it can have more active uptime on that, but that doesn't save it either. It actually doesn't make up for the sustain loss, and just the 870 would be a better choice. It just doesn't do anything really well. And that's kind of the downside. And we don't really have a purpose for these 12 rounds when we have a perfect pummel with 7 rounds, just reloading it for us. And then we'll come to the Super 90s. There's 3 variants of the Super 90 as well. The Marine Super 90, then there is the Super 90, and then the Tactical. Overall, the Tactical is the best pick if you're going to grade one up. It has a tiny bit more stability, as we kind of see there, but it is noticeable if you're A/B testing. This one as well is one of the more handleable weapons. It doesn't jump up severely. It has a pretty subdued reticule as well. It doesn't bloom out a lot between each shots. And then this is kind of the counterpart to the SASG as the top pick. And then this can per shot reload, which is situationally can be better, can be worse, as we kind of talked about. Yeah, if you kill one enemy and if you've lost two, you've used 2 rounds. If you're reloading, then this is of course faster because it just loads 2 shells instead of the entire magazine as the SSG. And because of that, it does both have basically a place and a purpose. They're on their burst and sustain so close to each other that it's basically negligible on that. But then, yeah, their difference of how they reload actually does make it quite a difference. Then, of course, we do have for this light glue as the name for them. And that is a very powerful one as well, because having that actually trigger on 4 pellets instead of 8 does make actually a difference. Quite often you would land maybe 5 pellets, just short of the 6 needed for normal brazen. Here you will have a much higher uptime with it. It being one of the better weapons as well. Then, yeah, a good weapon type with a good perfect version. Yeah, those are easy picks as we have here, both with the light glue and the tsunami. And then we come to the 612. The 612 really got hit pretty hard. I generally wouldn't pick this anymore. It used to be a really fast reloader. It is still decent because it has a magazine reload. Overall, though, if you're kind of leaning more towards this, I would maybe go with 870. They're definitely still usable if you have a graded one. They work decently well, but the SASG and the Super 90 do definitely outclass it now. The Splus, as we kind of talked about, really doesn't have per se a really great role, especially as well where it might seem the pick for Headhunter, it isn't because of the lack of those mod slots. It only has the magazine slot. We can actually improve its reload just with that. We could also put 5 headshot on there, but yeah, that is the max we can put on here in comparison to the 20 that we had on the military M870. And that makes it as well that, yeah, the military M870 with those mods will very much, as one is there, if we put headshots mods in here, very much outdoes the Spas. Also, the Spas kind of handles poorly. Most of the other shotguns are kind of similar to their handling. The Spas is definitely much more of a handful. It pulls up quite hard. It kind of, especially as well, it's blooming after shot. It's pretty heavy. And yeah, that actually gets us through all of the weapon types, as I kind of just double check. We didn't talk about the mop. The mop as kind of as armor unkill and preservation. This can be a very good tool for using when we have when we're not using basically the weapon as a tool for killing, but just as a handheld tool. Because what we can get here is, for instance, if we were using this on a mortar or something, we wouldn't be able to get in sync or such, of course, with that we normally would. But as a secondary, sometimes it's quite handy because this armor and kill triggers from skill kills as well. So this preservation. So you just hold this, you still have your damage to armor, especially with explosive builds, and that works out pretty well. But yeah, overall, I would definitely consider the light glue, the tsunami. Both of those keep showing up as well on the build collection, as you may have seen. The main picks for me are very much the Super 90s, specifically the tactical Super 90 SBS, as we have there. Then as well, together with that, the tactical SSG 12K, as we have there. You can also go 870, especially try it out as well with this new reload that it has. And then the 870 is very much the top dog for Headhunter. And thus we come to the conclusion of this video. As yeah, I hope you found it somewhat informative and somewhat helpful as we went all in on shotguns. I've been meaning to get this one out for quite a bit. It kind of got pushed back as other things came up, like Hollywood and such, of course. But yeah, now we got it in the bag. Of course, everything that you saw here will be linked down below as well. So yeah, you can go and look at it at your own leisure. But yeah, the shotguns wise, as we kind of saw, especially the SASG, especially the Super 90 are just generally good picks, especially for a DPS kind of build, where we're going just with Headhunter or with Hunter's Fury, not Headhunters. And then yeah, with Headhunter, we can definitely, the 870 is still kind of the go-to for there. And yeah, talent-wise, killers, sadists, situationally killers, pummels, and brazens can work really well as well. And yeah, we'll kind of leave it there as yeah, rambled on for quite a bit about it. But yeah, if you did enjoy this video or find it informative, please do any and all of the algorithm things down below. For my future videos, we're gonna go into concluding or continuing on with the character build showcases as we kind of had them for the updates to the build collection, which is now at this point basically is completely all of the builds have been updated, and I've actually made a somewhat of a second pass onto a lot of them. So they all look good now and updated. And yeah, we'll go on to character tree, which needs to happen. Also, as I kind of alluded here, there is a video I want to make about killer and kind of how it is not actually if we are at 60 crit chance, it activates kind of actually higher than that amount. And I'll kind of explain what the thinking behind me saying that is and kind of show that as well, which is something that I've been wanting to do actually months and months ago, actually way before killer and its update. But I kind of wanted to make a calculator to kind of quantify it. That didn't really work out, so I kind of left it. But now that killer is actually back kind of on track to be one of the best talents that we have kind of available, yeah, I kind of want to discuss that and just kind of, you know, we'll have a discussion around it. And of course, as well, the Pestilence build showcase is definitely going to happen somewhere in this month, likely a week or so away from now. So yeah, I hope you join me for those. And as always, have a good night.